All right. So have you ever been in a situation like you're at dinner
Yeah.
and you're offered something that totally goes against like your beliefs,
Yeah.
Like how would you
Yeah.
even deal with that? Do you like politely decline? Do you say something? I don't know. It's a tough one, right?
Right.
Well, today's deep dive, we're going to be going back to ancient Corinth,
Oh, wow.
where the early Christians were dealing with something kind of similar,
Okay.
and the stakes were pretty high. We're diving into 1 Corinthians 8.
Eh.
This passage deals with food that was sacrificed to idols.
Interesting.
But the thing is, it's not really about the food itself.
Oh.
It's more about how your actions could impact others, even if you knew the idol was meaningless.
Okay.
Buckle up, because we're going deep on knowledge, love, and how eating could be a major moral dilemma back then.
I'm ready.
So to kick things off, this passage starts with a pretty powerful statement, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. What's the significance of that contrast, especially in the context of the early church?
Well, knowledge, it was really important to early Christians, right? I mean,
Okay.
they wanted to understand their faith,
Absolutely.
but it wasn't enough. It wasn't the be all and end all,
Right.
Like true understanding had to come from love and empathy, for others.
Okay. So it was more about the application of knowledge, I guess, in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like having the knowledge is one thing,
Right.
but how you use it
Right.
and how it affects others. That's what really mattered.
So in a way, it's about putting that knowledge into action.
Yeah.
Not just having head knowledge, but actually putting it into practice in your interaction.
Yeah. Like living it out. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So I guess for context for our listeners,
Sure.
could you kind of paint a picture of what the whole, idol situation was back then
Yeah. Absolutely.
in the Roman world?
So you got to understand, idols were everywhere in the Roman world.
Everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Temples, homes, like you name it. There were idols.
Right.
And for the Romans, I mean, these weren't just statues, right?
Right.
They were representations of gods and goddesses. They believed that these idols, actually held power.
Wow.
They would offer sacrifices to these idols, like animals, food,
Okay.
all sorts of stuff, hoping to gain favor with the gods.
So for those early Christians, many of them, like you said, were coming from polytheistic backgrounds, right?
Right, exactly.
Where they also believed in many gods.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, must have been such a huge mental shift.
Oh, absolutely. It was a massive shift.
To go from believing in many gods to suddenly saying, there's only one God, and these idols are nothing.
Yeah, it's like a complete 180, right?
Totally.
And, even though they were now Christians, some of them, like you said, still struggled with that idea.
Right.
Those old beliefs and those old habits, they die hard.
They do. Habits die hard.
Yeah, and so when they saw this meat in the marketplace, this meat that had been offered to idols, it triggered something for them.
Right. So this meat, this was like leftover from the sacrifices.
Yeah, exactly. After the priests did their thing, the leftover meat was often sold off cheap. Right.
So this becomes a real problem, I guess, because it's like,
Has a real dilemma, yeah.
okay, so how does Paul address this? Because he obviously can't just tell them to not eat meat, right?
Well, he doesn't just tell them not to eat meat. He's way more nuanced than that.
Okay.
In verses 4-6, he's basically laying down the theological groundwork.
Okay.
He says, straight up, we know that there is no such thing as an idol in the world, and that there is no God but one. So he's emphasizing that these idols, they're just statues. They have no real power.
Right.
And there's only one true God.
Okay.
He's reminding them of what they already know,
So if they know this,
Right.
then why is it still a problem?
Because knowledge isn't everything, right? Like
Yeah.
we talked
Yeah,
about, right?
Right.
It's about the impact on others.
Okay, so let's talk about that impact. Who is Paul most concerned about here?
He's concerned about those who he calls the weak.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean he's judging them or anything.
Wow.
He's just recognizing that some people are at different stages of their faith journey.
Okay.
They might still be wrestling with those old beliefs.
Right. They're still new to this.
Exactly. And for them, seeing someone, especially someone they respect, like a leader in the church,
Right.
casually eating meat that's been offered to an idol, that could be really confusing. It
Yeah.
can make them doubt their own faith, maybe even lead them back to their old ways.
Okay, so it's about being sensitive to those who might be more easily influenced.
Exactly. He says in verse 9, but take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak.
Right. It's like saying, just because you have the knowledge and the freedom doesn't mean you should flaunt it.
Exactly. Your freedom should never come at the expense of someone else's faith.
So it's less about what you believe personally and more about how your actions might affect those around you.
Right. It's about putting love into action, like we talked about at the beginning.
So how does this all culminate? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think it all comes down to that powerful statement Paul makes in verse 13.
Okay.
He says, "Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat lest I make my brother stumble."
Wow. He's willing to completely give up something he knows is okay.
Yeah.
Just to avoid causing someone else to stumble.
Exactly. He's prioritizing their well-being over his own personal freedom.
That's pretty radical. I mean, for any time, but especially back then.
It is. It's really challenging.
So I think it's a good time to ask, how does this apply to us today? I mean, obviously, we're not running into idols at the grocery store.
Not usually.
But the principle is still there.
It is. It's a timeless principle.
So what are some modern day equivalents of the, food sacrifice to idols dilemma?
Well, I think there are lots of examples.
Okay.
I mean, think about dietary choices.
Okay.
You might be vegan for ethical reasons.
Right.
But someone else, they see meat as essential to their diet.
Right.
How do we navigate those differences?
Right.
With respect, understanding, or what about social and political issues?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're living in a time where beliefs clash constantly.
Right.
How do we have these conversations, these tough conversations?
Right.
Without causing harm.
Right. Without alienating people.
Exactly. Paul's message is all about being mindful of others, even when we disagree.
So really what we're talking about here is empathy and consideration, right?
Absolutely.
Putting others first sometimes.
Yeah, and recognizing that our actions, even the things we might consider small or insignificant,
right,
can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, you might not even realize it, but something that you do could be a stumbling block for someone else.
Exactly. It's a powerful thought.
It is.
So, maybe next time you're faced with a decision, big or small, think about the weak. Think about the people around you.
Right.
And ask yourself, could this be a stumbling block for someone?
It's like the idea of being a stumbling block for somebody.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful way of thinking about it.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap things up for this deep dive.
Yeah, I think so.
We hope you all, enjoyed this, and, you can take these questions with you. Think about how we can all practice a little more love and empathy.
Absolutely.
In our lives.
It's a journey, right?
It is. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll catch you all in the next deep dive.
See you next time.